Okay guys, good day. So welcome back to my YouTube channel. So for today's video, we will going to discuss the continuation of our cost accounting series, wherein the focus of our discussion will be manufacturing overhead departmentalization. So let's start. Okay, so as usual, before we begin, so let's first define what is departmentalization. So in cost accounting, departmentalization is a means of dividing the plant into segments called departments, to which overhead costs are charged. So actually, departmentalization is the same concept with the normal costing wherein we distribute the manufacturing overhead to the product by means of predetermined rate. However, in this case, under departmentalization, we divide the plant into segments called department. So para kasi mas madali yung ating pag-transfer or mas accurate yung ating gagamiting predetermined rate para naman i-distribute natin dun sa product mismo. So under departmentalization, we have two major departments, 'di ba? Meron tayong tinatawag na producing department and we also have the service department. So ano ba yung pinagkaiba nitong dalawang to? If we say producing department, this is the actual department wherein we transform the raw materials inventory into finished goods inventory. So let's say for example, we are in the manufacturing of furniture. So sa furniture, sa producing department, it involves the cutting, the molding, the painting, and the assembling of the raw materials para mabuo natin yung ating furniture. So technically, this is where the production happens. Kaya nga siya tinawag na producing department. So ang example niyan, so meron tayong assembly department and painting department. So meron din naman sa departmentalization na service department. So in service department, these are the departments that supports the producing department. So wala po ditong pinuproduce na product, but the cost incurred in service departments are indirectly related dun sa ating producing department. So example po niyan, we have the factory maintenance and we have the receiving department. So as you can see, wala naman pong nabubuong product doon sa factory maintenance kasi example niyan, yung ating mga janitor, yung ating mga cleaning materials, at yung salary ng ating mga supervisors, etc. etc. So although they are not partly directly related doon sa production ng product, they provide service doon sa ating mga producing department. That's why this cost must be separated from the producing department. So another example, we have the receiving department. Ang receiving department, yung mga tao dyan sa loob, they are not directly related to the production of the product, but they provide service dun sa ating mga producing department wherein they receive the product first before issuing it to the producing department. So under departmentalization, crucial na ma-separate natin si service department at producing department because at the end of the day, the cost should be allocated to the producing department because this is where the production happens. Okay? So the concept of departmentalization is also to zero out all the service department because at the end of the day, the product cost per unit is computed on the producing department. So ang mga service cost po or yung cost na na-incur natin sa service department, eventually, it must be transferred to the producing department. Okay, so let's now talk about the benefits of using departmentalization versus dun sa ating gumagamit lang tayo ng isang predetermined rate in computing the product cost per unit, di ba? So, if you will be using departmentalization as a tool in distributing the manufacturing overhead to the product, ito po yung mga benefits na pwede nating makuha. Number one, it provides improved product costing and promotes responsible control of overhead costs. So tama naman kasi nga kapag gumamit tayo ng departmentalization, na kaya na nating i-divide kung anong cost ang para dito sa specific department na to. At the same time, para mas magkaroon po tayo ng mas accurate na product costing. Kasi kapag gumamit lang tayo ng one predetermined rate, so pwede pong yung makuha nating predetermined rate ay hindi niya kayang i-represent yung buong factory overhead. That's why under department, so makakatulong po itong ma-improve yung ating product costing. Number two, it allows different department to have different overhead rates. So tama naman, if we'll be using departmentalization, so normally kino-compute po natin ang overhead rate diretso sa ating producing department. Because as I mentioned earlier, tinatransfer lang po natin yung estimated cost ng service department to that producing department. Then eventually, kino-compute po natin yung predetermined rate natin dun sa ating producing department. At isa sa mga benefits of using departmentalization, may laya yung producing department, so kada isa na mag-select ng appropriate overhead rate nila para naman mas relevant yung ating predetermined rate on each producing department. So number 3, the plant-wide average rate may be too high or too low for a particular product, especially a product involving only one of two or few department. So actually kasi kapag gumagamit lang tayo ng plant-wide average rate, may mga pagkakataon na si service department ay isang, let's say for example, we have one service department at we have four producing department, diba? So let's say for example, si service department, ang sinusupport niya lang is yung 1 tsaka 2 departments. So kapag gumamit kasi tayo ng plant-wide average rate, so pwedeng mangyaring mas scatter po natin yung cost or yung ating average rate ng service department doon sa ating mga producing department na apat na yun, which is ang dapat pasahan niya lang is yung department 1 tsaka yung department 2. That's why at the end of the day, baka magkaroon tayo ng too much na predetermined rate na magre-result naman doon sa ating under and over application in the future at magiging effect niyan ay material effect. Ayan po yung iniiwasan po natin. Kaya under departmentalization, na-cure na po yung defect na to kasi nga subdivided na yung ating planta into departments as mas madali na siyang ihanapin kung anong predetermined rate ang bagay for each producing department. So lastly, if we will be using departmentalization, departmentalization facilitates responsibility accounting and control of overhead costs by making costs a responsibility of each department's manager. So because of departmentalization, magkakaroon na po ng obligation or ng responsibility ang ating mga manager on each producing department para po makontrol po nila yung mga cost na ipapasa po sa kanila para naman po magkaroon tayo ng reliable na predetermined rate dun sa ating mga producing department. So as I mentioned earlier, let's say for example, meron tayong one service department and we have four producing departments, di ba? Let's say for example, si service department na to, ang sinusupport niya lang is yung department letter number 1 tsaka department number 2. So under departmentalization, dapat po hindi napapasahan ng cost si 3 and 4 kasi hindi naman sila sinusupport ni service department. So in that case, so makokontrol po ni department 3 and 4 yung kanilang cost kasi at the end of the day, hindi naman talaga dapat silang pasahan. So nagkakaroon po ng responsibility on each manager at para at the end of the day, makontrol po nila yung cost nila at ma-account po yung tamang cost na pumapasok sa kanilang mga department. Okay, so let's have an illustration para mas madali nating maintindihan yung departmentalization. So let's say for example, we have green company. So green company factories contain two producing departments such as assembly and finishing department and two service department, namely maintenance department and administration department. So maintenance department cost is allocated based on square feet and administration department cost is allocated to producing departments only based on the number of employees of the department. So assembly department overhead rate is computed based on the machine hours, while the finishing department is based on direct labor hours. The estimated annual data are as follows. So ayan po yung binigay na data. So ito po yung ating requirements, diba? Sabi dyan, determine the predetermined rate on the assembly department and finishing department. Number 2, determine the applied factory overhead of two producing departments assuming the actual activities below. And number 3, determine the under-applied or over-application on each producing department and the company as a whole. So in this case, ang goal natin is to really compute the over and under application of the factory overhead ng ating manufacturing firm. Pero dahil nga kinorse through natin yan by department, so dinivide po natin yung department by 2. We have production department and the service department. In this case, ang sinabi natin dito, ang assembly at finishing department ay considered po yan as producing, di ba? Nilagay ko dyan, producing. Then, yung maintenance and administration, considered po yan as service. Okay? So sabi daw dyan, para mas madali natin siyang mai-transfer yung cost from service department to producing department, we have to identify the appropriate cost driver for each department. So sabi daw dyan, si service department ay kailangan i-transfer dun sa ating mga producing department. Si maintenance department, ang basis po natin dyan ay ang square feet kasi sinabi dun sa problem. So ilalagay lang natin dyan, square feet. Yung administration department naman, ita-transfer natin sa producing department. Ang magiging basis naman po niyan ay number of employees. Lagay natin yan, number of employees. Then number 3, ang assembly department naman daw ay ita-transfer na or kukumputin natin yung ating predetermined rate using the machine hours. Finishing department naman, ita-transfer natin yan or kukumpute natin yung predetermined rate using the direct labor hours. So tatandaan nyo lang po yung iyong mga sinabi natin kasi it will be our basis later para mas madali natin mo compute yung ating predetermined rate. Okay, so let's try to answer the first requirement, which is to determine the predetermined overhead rate per producing department. So ito yung kaninang problem natin. So meron tayong 2 producing departments and 2 service departments. So namely, the assembly department sa producing, finishing sa producing, maintenance sa service, administration sa service. Then nagbigay din diyan ng mga applicable na cost drivers and of course the overhead budget. So when year 2,080,000 pesos for the assembly, 1,600,000 for finishing, 800,000 pesos for maintenance, and 600,000 pesos for administration. For easy reference, mas magandang ilagay natin si service department sa left side, si producing department naman sa right side, kasi para mas madali yung ating distribution. Because as I mentioned earlier, at the end of this distribution, dapat po wala nang matitira doon sa ating service department. So ito po yung ginawa kong table dyan, di ba? So we have the maintenance department and the administration department, which is part of the service department, and ang producing department natin nasa right side, which is assembly and finishing department. So ilagay muna natin yung overhead cost. So nakalagay naman dyan kanina, maintenance 800,000, administration we have 600,000 pesos, assembly 2,080,000 pesos, finishing 1,600,000 pesos. So ngayon, i-distribute na natin yung mga cost sa service department doon sa producing department because that is our objective, which is to determine the predetermined overhead rate ng ating producing department. So hindi natin yun magagawa kapag meron pang amount na nakikita doon sa ating mga service department. So let's start. Ang una po nating i-distribute is yung maintenance department. So paano ba ko-compute yung maintenance department? So as I mentioned earlier, we have determined the applicable cost driver. So sa case natin, ang maintenance, ita-transfer daw po siya based sa ating square feet. So nakalagay doon square feet. So kukuhain nyo lang po, ano ba yung papasahang department ni maintenance? So sabi dyan, ang papasahan lang naman niya ay yung dalawang producing department, which is si assembly at finishing. So therefore, tingnan nyo po yung square feet na applicable for the assembly and finishing kasi ayun yung gagawin nating cost driver para mailipat natin yung estimated cost ng maintenance dun sa ating 2 producing departments. So sabi daw dyan, si assembly, meron daw siyang square feet na 84,000 pesos, while naman si finishing meron tayong 36,000 pesos. So dahil dalawa lang naman sila yung papasahan mo, so i-ignore na po natin yung square feet na applicable kay maintenance tsaka kay administration. So to get the cost to be transferred to assembly department, so 84,000 plus 36,000, so ito po yan. So ang ating magiging divisor ay yung 120,000. This is the sum of 84,000 square feet for assembly and 36,000 for finishing. So kuhain nyo lang po, i-prorate lang natin. So 84,000 ay related for assembly. Then yung 120,000, it is the sum of the assembly and finishing square feet. So i-multiply lang natin yan doon sa cost na ita-transfer natin from maintenance to this to assembly department. So kapag kinompute nyo yan, ang lalabas po dyan ay 560,000 pesos. How about sa finishing department? So sa finishing department, same approach lang din. Pero dito, ang related square feet lang natin ay 36,000. So ilagay mo lang. So 36,000 divided by 120,000 multiplied by 800,000 pesos, which is the maintenance cost. So therefore, the amount to be transferred to finishing department will be 240,000 pesos. So just to make sure na tama yung cost na ita-transfer natin, so 560,000 plus 240,000, so ang magiging result niyan ay 800,000 pesos. So 800,000 pesos, which is equivalent to the estimated cost ng ating maintenance cost. So since okay na, maililiminate na natin yung estimated cost ng maintenance, may transfer na natin siya kay assembly at finishing. So pwede na tayo magkaroon ng row for first allocation. For our first allocation, based dun sa computation natin kanina, babawasan lang natin si maintenance ng 800,000 pesos. Then, ililipat natin yan kay assembly, worth 560,000 pesos as we computed dun sa baba. Then, sa finishing naman, ang i-distribute natin dyan ay 240,000 pesos. So, kapag chinek nyo, wala na po tayong cost na sa maintenance kasi na-transfer na natin siya dun sa ating two producing department. So, for the next allocation, which is the administration, which is an example of service department, so, kailangan din po nating i-transfer yung cost niyan doon sa ating assembly and finishing. So, based sa analysis natin earlier, ang appropriate cost driver for administration, we have the number of employees. So, dahil lang papasahan lang naman niya ay si two producing department, so nakabase po yan doon sa number of employees ng two producing departments natin. So, namely for assembly, we have how many employees? 600. For finishing, we have 400 employees. So, that will be our basis. So, administration, ang basis po natin ay number of employees. So, for assembly, ang computation lang natin is yung number of employees ni assembly, which is 600, over the total number of employees ni assembly at ni finishing. So, 600 plus 400, we have 1,000 employees. So, 600 employees over 1,000, multiply natin doon sa estimated cost ng administration, which is 600,000 pesos. So, the amount to be allocated to assembly department related to administration, we have 360,000 pesos. How about for the finishing department? So, sa finishing department, we have 400 employees over 1,000 employees multiplied to 600,000 pesos. So, the amount to be allocated from administration to finishing department will be 240,000 pesos. So, to check if tama ba yung ating itatransfer na cost, so 360 plus 240,000 pesos, the amount is equal to 600,000 pesos, which is the same amount na i-allocate natin from administration to the producing department. So, this will be our second allocation. So, for the administration, i-less lang natin yung 600,000 pesos. Ilipat natin yung 360 sa assembly at ilipat natin yung 240,000 sa finishing department. So, after the two allocations, these are now the new balances, diba? So, the maintenance, wala na po kasi nga zero na siya na i-transfer na natin dun sa two producing departments. Sa administration naman, wala na din na i-transfer na natin dun sa ating two producing departments. So, si assembly, as you can see, meron na po tayong total overhead cost na 3 million pesos. Si finishing naman, meron na tayong 2,080,000 pesos. So, from here, we can already determine the predetermined overhead rate to be used on these producing departments. So, unahin natin si assembly. So, si assembly, meron na tayong total factory cost na 3 million pesos. So, ang sabi doon sa ating illustration kanina, the basis of predetermined rate na itatransfer natin kay assembly is based on the machine hours. So, babalikan nyo po yung ating machine hours. So, ano ba yung machine hours natin dyan? So, sabi daw dyan, the estimated machine hours for assembly department is 100,000 pesos. So, ay 100,000 machine hours, diba? So, ilagay natin, diba? So, divided there natin dun sa 100 machine hours for the assembly department. So, for the finishing department, the appropriate cost driver, as we analyzed earlier, we have the direct labor hours. So, the direct labor hours related to finishing department is 80,000 direct labor hours. So, from here, we can already determine the predetermined overhead rate applicable for assembly department and finishing department. So, for the assembly department, the predetermined rate per machine hours, which is the appropriate cost driver, will be 30 pesos. For the finishing department, the applicable cost driver is direct labor hours. So our predetermined rate is 26 pesos per direct labor hours. So since meron na po tayong predetermined rate, so meron na po tayong basis later on para naman makompute yung ating applied factory overhead. Okay, so to answer the requirement number 2 and number 3, so ito po yun. So number 2, the question is that determine the applied factory overhead of two producing departments assuming the actual activities below. So ang assembly daw nakapag-incur ng machine hours totaling to 110,000 machine hours, and sa finishing meron tayong 70,000 machine hours. For the assembly, under direct labor hours, so nakapagtala sila ng 130,000 direct labor hours. For finishing naman, 70,000 direct labor hours. So the requirement is to determine the applied factory overhead. So dahil lang sa departmentalization tayo, the computation of the applied factory overhead must be made for every department. So ito po yun. So ito yung na-compute natin kanina. So the predetermined rate on assembly department, we have 30 pesos per machine hours. For finishing department, we have 26 pesos per direct labor hours. So let's start for the assembly department. So assembly department, the applied factory overhead, which is under assembly department, the appropriate cost driver is the machine hours, di ba? So check nyo lang kung magkano kung ilan yung actual machine hours na na-incur natin sa production. So based on our illustration, the total number of machine hours is 110,000 machine hours. So therefore, to compute for the applied factory overhead dedicated for assembly department, we have 110,000 machine hours multiplied to 30 pesos per machine hour. So therefore, the applied factory overhead to be charged to production under assembly department, we have 3,300,000 pesos. So to record the transaction, so ito po yan. So dahil charge to production, so debit tayo ng work in process, then credit tayo ng applied factory overhead amount, yung na-compute natin sa taas, which is 3,300,000 pesos. Okay? So, to record the actual factory overhead, which is given dun sa number 3, so we have factory overhead control. Ang amount po niyan ay 3,400,000 pesos. Then, credit tayo ng various account. So, dito, sinosolve na po natin si number 2 tsaka si number 3. So, based on the illustration or based dun sa ating journal entries, as you can see, the applied factory overhead is less than compared dun sa actual factory overhead. So, therefore, meron po tayong under application amounting to 100,000 pesos. So for the finishing department, ang ating applicable cost driver is the direct labor hours. So dahil direct labor hours ang ating cost driver, so balikan lang natin yung ating illustration dyan. So the actual direct labor hours dedicated for finishing department is 70,000 direct labor hours. So ayan po yung gagamitin po natin. I-multiply lang natin dun sa na-compute natin kaninang predetermined rate. So the predetermined rate that we computed earlier is 26 pesos per direct labor hours multiplied to the actual direct labor hours incurred on finishing department, which is 70,000. So 70,000 direct labor hours times 26. So the applied factory overhead to be charged to finishing department will be 1,820,000 pesos. So dahil meron na tayong applied factory overhead for finishing department, so i-record natin yung charge dun sa production. So debit ka lang ng work in process ulit kasi nga nilagay natin sa production yan using a predetermined rate multiplied to the actual activity. So debit work in process, then credit applied factory overhead. The amount is 1,820,000 pesos. So to record the actual factory overhead incurred on finishing department, we have 1,700,000 pesos. So debit ka ulit ng factory overhead control, then credit ka ng various accounts. So various accounts yung ginamit natin para for simplicity purposes kasi pwede yung cash, accounts payable, or accumulated depreciation, prepaid insurance. So it depends. So nilagay ko na lang ng various accounts for simple presentation. So as you can see doon sa ating problem, So meron po tayong yung applied factory overhead natin is 1,820,000 pesos, but the factory overhead control is only 1,700,000 pesos. So ibig sabihin, the applied factory overhead is more than dun sa ating actual factory overhead. So therefore, the result is that we have over-applied factory overhead amounting to 120,000 pesos. So dahil meron na po tayong applied factory overhead for both producing department, so makakapag-generate na po tayo ng total under or over application sa ating production. So sa case natin, mas malaki yung over application kasi ang over application natin is 120,000 pesos and the under application is 100,000 pesos. So therefore, the resolution is that doon sa ating two producing department, we have actually an over applied amounting to 20,000 pesos. So as you can see, over applied, maganda siyang tingnan kasi it will reduce our cost kasi ibig sabihin, mas malaki yung ating predetermined rate. Pero because of departmentalization na realize natin na kung na dalawa po yun ang pinanggalingan ng ating over applied. So kaya maliit yung nakalagay dyan kasi nga under applied tayo doon sa assembly department tapos over applied naman tayo doon sa ating finishing department. So nakakatulong po si departmentalization na ma-detect natin kung saan talaga yung nagkamali tayo ng pag-compute or pag-determine ng predetermined rate para sa in the future, meron na tayong basis on how to properly determine ulit yung ating predetermined rate. So ayan po yung ating discussion that is related to departmentalization. So for the next video, we will try to discuss the 3 different methods on how to allocate service cost to the producing department or the service department to producing department. So after this video, please proceed on that. Thank you.